Thank you all for being here today. I am ACLU of Minnesota Staff Attorney David McKinney. With me today are attorneys and staff from the ACLU of Minnesota, as well as the law firm of Fagery Baker Daniel. We are also joined by supporters from the Restore the Vote Coalition, a group of more than 90 groups throughout the state committed to restoring the voting rights of all Minnesotans with felony conviction. And last and most importantly, we are joined by several courageous individuals who live in our communities but are barred from voting because they have a felony conviction and are on probation. On their behalf, we filed a lawsuit this morning in Minnesota State District Court in order to restore their voting rights and the rights of over 52,000 disenfranchised Minnesotans throughout the state. Under Title VII of the Minnesota Constitution, Minnesotans convicted of felonies are automatically disenfranchised until their civil rights have been restored. But the Constitution does not state how or when those rights are restored, or when or who is empowered to restore them. Given the facts, we believe the current system, created by the legislature, violates the constitutional right to equal protection, due process, and the fundamental right to vote. The current system treats people who are on probation and living in the community as unequal to their neighbors, as second-class citizens, for no rational reason. Many have never seen the inside of a prison, but they are placed on extremely long periods of probation that can last for decades. These citizens live, work, marry, have kids, pay taxes, worship, and volunteer, but they cannot vote. Denying someone the right to vote should never be used as the means of punishment, but rather a means for reintegration. People who vote are more connected to their community and less likely to reoffend. The number of disenfranchised keeps growing, skyrocketing more than 3,000% since our Constitution's founding. Part of that growth is due to the fourfold increase of the number of offenses classified as felonies, many of them nonviolent. Minnesotans from all walks of life, in small towns and big cities throughout the state, are denied the right to vote. In fact, there are twice as many people currently barred from voting in greater Minnesota than the Twin Cities. Still, people of color and indigenous people are disproportionately denied the right to vote. Given this nation's history with racism and mass voter disenfranchisement, any law that creates such disparities is not just and should not be upheld by our courts. The current system fails to provide a just response to the constitutional mandate of restoring an individual's civil rights. We believe the just response is clear. The right to vote should be automatically restored to people convicted of felonies who are on probation or supervised release. Here in Minnesota, we believe that everyone deserves a second chance. Restoring voting rights gives them that chance and a voice in the future of their communities where they already live, work, and contribute. Now, 3 of our plaintiffs are here today and have prepared statements to make. Then one of our co-counsel in the lawsuit will say a few words, and then we will take questions. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jen Schroeder. I'm a drug and alcohol counselor. I am sentenced to 40 years of probation. That means I can't vote until I'm 71 years old. I'm proud that I've turned my life around. I volunteer, I have a job, I pay taxes, I'm active in my church. I'm dedicated to making a difference in the lives of others. I should have the right to vote for the person who I think is going to make the policy changes that are going to help me be successful. There's absolutely no reason why somebody who has served their time shouldn't be able to participate in our democracy. I've only been able to vote once in the Gore-Bush election. I was 18 years old and I rushed the polls. I voted the second I turned 18. I follow politics more than most people I know. I know I have opinions on what I think is right for the United States, and I feel very silenced. The hell an addict goes through is punishment enough. Addiction is not just a disease, it's a symptom of something bigger that's wrong in our society. Topping it with overly harsh sentences and stripping people of their right to vote does not help recovering addicts or our communities. When I hit rock bottom, I was pulled over for driving without a license. I was charged with possession. I was sentenced to 365 days in a county jail, followed by 5 months in treatment, and 40 years of probation, with 98 months hanging over my head. A judge also took my daughter away. But this time I did not turn to drugs. I decided that if I really wanted my daughter to know how much I loved her, I was gonna not give up. I rebuilt my life from nothing. I had no license, no car, never had a bank account, no credit, wasn't ever taught any life skills. So I enrolled in college, I took out student loans, and I busted 2 hours each direction for my first semester until I could afford a car. I earned a 3.8 GPA. I was the first person in my family to graduate. I earned a degree in addiction counseling, and I'm now a counselor at the same treatment center where I started my journey, Wayside Recovery Center. I'm determined to help people who are still suffering from addiction. So when do you get to the point when what you're doing now and who you have become is enough? How about when your probation officer comes to your college graduation, or when the judge asks you to come, the same judge that sentenced me asks me to come back and work in drug court? Or when the child welfare asks me to come and speak at the conference, is that enough yet? When am I a full-fledged member of society again? Voting is a civil right. That's why I'm here today. Every Minnesotan should have a voice and a vote. And the voices of the people struggling are the ones who should be heard the loudest. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is T.R. Caldwell. I'm the father of 2 boys. I work at the Power of People Leadership Institute, the largest and most successful reentry group in Minnesota. I'm here for a couple of reasons. I was convicted of a felony over 7 years ago. The last election that I voted in was Obama, actually. Actually, it was the first time I actually ever voted. And my mother dragged me to the polls that day. And I was kind of concentrated on doing something else that day. But she insisted, like she instilled in me the importance of what that day meant. Just voting itself. And I would always see her every voting day. She'd have the sticker on and she would just be so happy, and she would tell me, but it never really resonated with me. Fast forward, now, here I am. I became an advocate for Restore the Vote Minnesota, and I've been pushing the narrative for getting people to vote. And so when my children are with me sometimes, they ask me, well, Dad, when are you gonna vote? Where's your sticker? And I have to explain to them that I can't vote. And that's hurtful. It's hurtful when you're not satisfied with the current school board that your children go to school in, and you can't vote to change that leadership. And you just have to grant, you just have to basically take it. And so this is very dear to my heart. It's difficult. It's very difficult because once you've been released, you feel as if you've served your debt to society. And oftentimes, when you're released, it's like your sentence starts right over again. And you're a part of every facet of society except the one that makes you feel the most a part of society. And that's a problem for me. And I take this problem to the heart, more so for my children. I want to be an example for my boys, and I want them to know, especially with the current political climate right now, how critical voting is and the power that they have. So thank you guys for your time.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
My name is Elijah Darris, and I'm an organizer here at the ACLU. I'm also a public speaker, and I'm also an entrepreneur. I'm here today to speak in favor of voting rights. I'm heavily contributing to society, paying taxes, obeying all the laws, rules, regulations, restrictions, guidelines that elected officials put in place or that the voting public make determinations for. I drive people to the polls. Literally, I drive people to the polls. I register people to vote. I volunteered with many campaigns. Yet when all is said and done, I can't get that little red sticker that Thierry just got through speaking about. I see it coming out of many different voting locations that I'm at. I see the pride and joy that people have when they slap it on the doors of their houses. That actually helps me know I need to knock that particular door even harder because this person is most likely definitely going to vote. So, they have those little red stickers with absolute pride and absolute joy. And I'm 35 years old, and I've never been able to vote. I have no say, no voice, no counted vote when it comes to all of the policies, laws, rules, regulations, restrictions, guidelines that are put in place. It's undemocratic to expect me to be in society contributing to society and not be a full member of society. Everybody deserves a real second chance. What makes it even harder is that I know that there are that the same racial disparities that exist in our criminal justice system that I am fighting against day in and day out. Those are the same disparities that undergird and that help to drive the disenfranchisement of voters, especially those of us who are formerly incarcerated or who are your neighbors right now. No one could look at me and say, oh, he did time in prison. When you are broken down on the side of the road, or when you're stuck in the snow and you need some help, and I come, you don't look and say, oh, he's formerly incarcerated. You look and you say, wow, this is a great person who's coming to help, and I'm so grateful. It's common knowledge that people of color are disproportionately arrested, charged, and convicted, and that trickles down into probation and how many people are disenfranchised. The number of people barred from voting is appalling. It's appalling. And we must do better. And so I am so grateful that the ACLU, with our partners, has made the decision to stand up and to say no and to say yes to the vote. Thank you.
Craig Coleman from the Faber Baker Daniels law firm. More than 50,000 of our fellow Minnesotans are currently denied the right to vote, despite living, working, and participating in our communities. The exclusion of these citizens from the political process is fundamentally wrong, it's undemocratic, and it's corrosive to constitutional governance. Minnesota has never articulated any justification for disenfranchising citizens who live in our communities following a felony conviction. No justification exists. Citizens on parole and probation pay taxes, raise children, and bear all the burdens of citizenship. Our government's stated interest lies in integrating those on supervised release into the community and restoring them to fully contributing members of our state's economic, social, and political life. Excluding our clients and others on supervised release from the political process directly contradicts that interest. Because our fundamental right to vote, the foundation of our democracy, cannot be denied absent the most compelling reason, disenfranchisement of our clients violates the Minnesota's Constitution. We are proud to assist our clients in restoring their right to vote, and ultimately we are here on behalf of all 50,000 Minnesotans who are wrongly denied the right to vote. Thank you, and we'll take questions.
Has this ever been accomplished before through legal action, or have states that do allow people to vote as soon as they're out of incarceration, or has that always been done legislatively? Would this be new ground?
Actually, can you repeat that question once
Have
more?
you ever been able to accomplish this goal through a lawsuit in this country? Any of the states that have better, that do it more justly than Minnesota does, was that as a result of a lawsuit, or was it always done by their legislatures?
Yeah, I'm not aware of what other states have done in terms of their doing it through a lawsuit. I mean, we sort of the most familiar one to us at this point is sort of Florida, right, and the constitutional amendment that was passed last year by the voters. But there are lawsuits throughout the country right now going on challenging disenfranchisement laws on a number of different ways, and certainly some of those have been more successful than others.
Do you expect the court to settle this, or is this intended to light a fire under the legislature to get something passed?
We're intending to restore the right to vote one way or another. The legislature has thus far failed to correct the injustice of denying those in the community the right to vote. And that's where we step in, and we believe in Minnesota courts, and we believe in the Minnesota Constitution's protection of the fundamental right to vote. So if the legislature takes this occasion to fix the problem, that would be welcome. But if they don't, that's the role of the courts, and we believe will ultimately prevail.
Are you expecting a spirited defense from Secretary Simon and his attorney, Keith Ellison?
Yes, we have no reason to believe that both constitutional officers are committed to enforcing the laws of the state, and that they will defend this law vigorously. But we believe our position is right, and that when presented to the courts are going to rule in our favor.
We've encountered a lot of people in the community who aren't even fully informed about their voting rights, whether when they're going to be restored. Some people we encountered tell us they didn't know they could ever get their voting rights back.
Yeah.
Is that something that, does the state have a role in doing a better job of keeping people apprised of that?
It's extraordinarily perverse that the system we're in is ultimately results in criminalizing the right to vote. And where folks are in the community trying to function as citizens, being threatened with prosecution and subject to prosecution for voting is just wrong. That needs to be fixed.
You draw out some of the disproportionate numbers of people of color who are facing conviction or probation, as well as greater numbers in greater Minnesota. Do you have a sense of why those numbers are not equal across groups?
So one of our clients mentioned that a lot of the racial inequities in our criminal justice system play out here. So everything from apprehension of disproportionate members of people of color in the criminal justice system to sentencing decisions, probation decisions, all of that winds up in a disproportionate number of persons of color being disenfranchised. And that is yet another reason why the current system can't pass constitutional muster.
One of the examples we heard was 40 years of probation. What could be done to overturn that through your lawsuit here, so she doesn't have to wait 40 years?
Well, the lawsuit is seeking to restore her rights immediately. Indeed, Minnesota has one of the lowest rates of incarceration, but one of the highest rates of probations, and putting people on longer probations than really, in my opinion, is necessary. And indeed, to your point, in Greater Minnesota, the probationary period, the average probationary period, is longer than in the Twin Cities. And so you've got folks who are affected both in the Twin Cities and urban areas, but also in rural areas. This is a huge problem in terms of the length of probation being extremely long, and our seeks to correct that, to say even if people are on probation for 40 years, like one of our clients, she should have the right to vote. And this lawsuit doesn't address through the probationary period itself, but it does address the point of having the ability to vote while on probation.
Sometimes when this is debated at the Capitol, some of the conservative lawmakers say that there should be, the law should be set up that different types of former offenders are treated differently. Like, for instance, they want people who commit murder to be permanently barred from voting, and people with nonviolent offenses to have, to get their rights restored sooner. Should the law, the current law doesn't differ on that. I mean, there are parole murderers that can vote, I assume, eventually. So would you support any type of a settlement or any type of legislation that would set up different categories of offenders when it comes to voting rights?
So a couple things. First, the legislature has never articulated justification for the current system. If they go through the legislative process, lay a record, and articulate something, I guess you could count that as progress. But the fact that they haven't thus done so is a problem and makes this law unconstitutional. But beyond that, I think going down that road is a mistake. The right to vote is not premised on our moral standing, and if we've got to try to interject who is moral and who isn't into the right to vote, I think that's problematic and takes us in a problematic direction. I can tell you we're extraordinarily proud of our clients, and they belong in the political process.
What's the timeline? What happens next?
Well, the Secretary of State, Simon, and A.G. Ellison will have some time to look over the lawsuit and file an answer shortly, and then we'll move to some discovery and then hopefully get this to the courts as quick as possible. As you know, there's an election coming up here shortly, and then in November 2020 is another big significant election. We want to get this to the courts and decided before people have to go and make these critical decisions.
Thank you.
Is that all? Any other questions? All right. Thank you, folks. I appreciate it.